I was actually at that stage where I'm done with outbound. As soon as you're at that Series C or Series D, the board will just look at your numbers and say, hey, Dylan, that's freaking amazing. Now 2x that.
Was it really about looking the right people that that have the right experience so you can go fast?
Can't emphasize this enough how sales is a team sport. I don't necessarily need the 50 biggest rock stars. We had force management, we had winning by design, we've had them all, we had all the playbooks. They are important, they are critical, but at the end of the day...
Please meet Tarmo van der Goot, who 10x Chargebee in our region as VP Sales EMEA. In 2020, Chargebee had limited footprint in our region, which was actually mainly coming through inbound. So in order to accelerate that growth, a robust outbound go-to-market strategy was necessary. And so that's exactly what Tarmo did. He has built the outbound strategy and then built a team that would be responsible to execute on it. So in a period of 3 years, the team grew from 2 to 90 FTEs. And so therefore, in this episode, we talked about various subjects that should be close to any dedicated sales leader in this growth stage. Finding and hiring a rockstar team, onboarding and coaching these talents, and 3, the few critical and managerial elements that truly mattered according to Tarmo. So please enjoy my conversation with Tarmo. Well, Tarmo, I'm super excited to have you on the show because we will be talking about how to build an outbound sales motion from the ground up. You did it at Chargebee, where initially it was just about having inbound, and that's good, that's interesting, that's nice to have, but ultimately if you want to grow and grow fast, you need to have that outbound sales sequence into place. So super excited to talk about this, but please, Tarmo, for the people that doesn't know you yet and don't also really understand like the sales context that you have acquired those experiences in, can you please introduce yourself and bring any past experiences that you think might be relevant?
Yeah, most certainly. So hi everyone, Tarmo van der Goot. I've been working in fintech and SaaS now for almost 15 years. It actually all started at the beginning of my career. I started at Klarna, and this was right around the first initial big banking crisis, and I saw all the different industries and verticals struggling, and definitely back then we were focused so much on e-commerce, growing. So very early on in my career, I kind of had this brain bubble around, well, seems like the world is burning around me, but this particular industry just keeps on growing, so this might be a good industry to build your career in. And 15 years later, here we are. So I worked at different businesses, managed different teams. Some of them focused on the mid-market and others on enterprise. And interestingly enough, I came to a point in my career where I was actually at that stage where I'm done with outbound. It didn't really juice my energy anymore, and I kind of felt like, you know what, I've learned everything there is. Well, I mean, you never learn everything, obviously, but I was kind of just doing the same day to day, and I was really looking forward to changing it up a little bit and going after that product-led growth model that I've always read about and thought, well, let's see how it actually works when you're having a very good collaboration with marketing who can generate the qualified leads, and it's basically just a matter of making sure that you understand the reasoning why people are actually approaching a particular product and then finding that match. So this is actually how I, in the beginning, came in contact with Chargebee. First conversations with the hiring manager back then was, hey Tarmo, we love the background, we feel that you're a great fit, and we're looking for someone who can build that outbound motion. I get it, I totally understand, but it's not purely actually what I'm looking for at this particular stage, but let's stay in touch. And then skip forward around 10 months. We always basically kept in touch, obviously, and then I started thinking about it, and they made some decisions earlier on that they felt like weren't the right ones, so we basically got back in contact, and I was kind of like, you know what, if it's outbound that you want, then I can actually just reassess and readdress my own personal goals that I wanted at this particular stage in my career. I thought, all right, let's do this outbound. And we just basically went full force with it.
Love it. Yeah, because what I could read from your LinkedIn is that you kind of co-built the European footprint for Chargebee then from 2 to 19 FTE.
Yeah, so Chargebee, originally the founders were all from India. So what they always basically say is raised in India, but servicing the world. So they always basically had that global mindset. And one of the things they did really well that not every startup gets right is having that global focus from day one. So usually what you see, which is obviously, I mean, it's quite normal with your European business, then where's your ICP, right? It's either in your homegrown market or it's in Europe. You don't necessarily go out your very first day when you're trying to get to that first 1 million ARR. Hey, let's sell in China, let's sell in the US, let's sell in Europe, let's go crazy, let's sell everywhere. It's usually not the right strategy. For them, however, just, starting the business from India, for them it was quite, or maybe not quite evident, but at least they were kind of like, well, I mean, we're not going to be selling into our home market, even though it's billions of people. From day one, we're going to be selling both in Europe and the US, which, again, normally you would advise any startup to not do this. But just because they made that decision, it actually paid huge benefits throughout their company life cycle. So when I joined, the company was around 300 FTE. Europe back then was already a large portion of the market share, but they hadn't really at that stage hired locally in Europe. So what they did a year before I joined, which is something that you see more often, is they sent their best sales rep at the company to Europe to kind of try to establish that beachfront. Hired a couple of more AEs to sit beside them, and then see what happens. See if you can be more successful in Europe. So that AE was quite successful. At least they proven to the leadership around, hey, having people locally in Europe actually makes a difference. And that's actually so how we actually came in contact with Chargebee. And then when I joined, they literally had 3 or 4 people working in the European market in Europe. Our office was actually a table or a desk on loan of one of our European customers, which is quite interesting basically on your first day when you come over. And it's a great way to learn your customers, right? Because they're literally sitting in their office. But yeah, it's definitely the humble beginnings from Europe.
For sure.
Growing to where it is now.
How about like the sales motion? Because it wasn't primarily inbound, I suppose. What can you say about the sales motion that was initially there when you joined?
Yeah, so it was 100% inbound driven at that time, or product led. So a couple of things obviously that worked into Chargebee's benefit is just that the product market fit was obviously there. You can't necessarily create product market fit. You either basically have it or you don't, and you can work on it. But in Chargebee's case, there was a really clear demand, recurring billing software. So that created a solution for an existing problem in the market. So the marketing team had created a tremendous rate generating engine, which the biggest problem at that particular moment in time was basically just making sure that you're doing the right qualification at the front to make sure that everything that trickles down is actually a lead that's going to materialize in one opportunity, right? So it was a lot of filtering and then making sure that you're talking to the right people and the right customers. However, and this is something that was very important to address, the majority of the leads coming in were all startup companies, right? So anywhere between 0 to 5 million ARR was the majority of the inbound engine. And the goal specifically back then from Chargebee was, right, so how are we going to make that switch and that move up market? So not saying there weren't any mid-market or enterprise leads coming through the funnel, but definitely not at the level where you wanted to grow as a business, which was an awesome, obviously, opportunity to get your hands on and make that impact.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, all right, you joined Chargebee and you got to make it happen. Obviously, you have that product market fit, you have those initial customers, you know that there is like demand for the thing, but you still want to move up market. So you know that you will have to move into outbound. That was also in the conversation with the founders at Chargebee. So you know that was something that you will have to build. But where do you start? How did you approach that? Was there like a step-by-step, somewhat of a process that you can still remember from doing that transformation?
Yeah, so most important, and I know this is, I'm sure, something that a lot of other leaders have basically mentioned on the podcast, but it's finding the right people that is critical at this particular stage. and finding the right people with the right beliefs. So I really wanted to have that sales team where, I'm not going to use the word that I was the biggest cheerleader, and the sales team was basically that you could do nothing wrong, but it was really one of those, hey, there's a great, tremendous opportunity here. And now you need to find the right people with the right motivation who actually want to take that challenge and make it successful. So one of the first things we actually did was obviously segment the market into the right categories in terms of opportunity sizes. So we know we had a great fit for startup, but then it was, all right, so how does mid-market look and how does enterprise look? Because enterprise and mid-market can mean different things for different businesses at different stages of their life cycle, right? So it was really important to fine tune, all right, so what's our mid-market, how does that look like? And what's our enterprise, how does that look like? And now critical finding the right profiles with the right experience who know how to be successful in that mid-market and into that enterprise market. Making the right categories and finding the right people to it. Yeah.
Were you looking to hire based on then experience that, because you mentioned that had the right experience to sell in mid-market, to sell in enterprise sales. But you also mentioned like having that right mindset, right belief. Hi guys. Before we dive back into the episode, I've got something super, super exciting to share with you. Mark your calendars for May 16 because We Are Sales 2024 is happening. And this isn't just any conference, it is the conference for European sales leaders where you can expect to learn from the best and be surrounded by the most ambitious revenue leaders from Europe. And so whether you're an aspiring sales leader, sales director, VP sales, or chief revenue officer, the We Are Sales Conference is truly the place to be. Tickets are now available and you can grab your ticket by visiting our website at wearesales.com/conference. Again, it is wearesales.com/conference. And now back to the episode. So was it more about looking for the right talents that you could train, coach, that would adapt in the right context? Or was it really about looking the right people that that have the right experience so you can go fast?
I wanted to basically have the perfect team with the right individual skill set. And people never believe me when I say this. Interestingly enough, when you tell me, hey, let's create a big sales org of 10, 20, or 50 people, I actually don't want, never say never, but I don't necessarily need the 50 biggest rock stars. And again, but let me tell you what I mean by this. So, obviously I would want and love to have 50 awesome rockstar AEs who just, reach their quota every freaking month, quarter, and year. And this is just primarily driven also by personal experiences. I'm not going to name any company names, but I've been part of a very toxic sales culture sometime in my career. So this is one of those Wolf of Wall Street type sales orgs that when you're younger, it looks awesome looking from the outside in, but when you're actually working in one of those sales environments, it's just so freaking toxic. And people aren't working for the company's success, saying that that's basically should be your key driver, but it wasn't intrinsically motivated and people weren't helping each other. The number one rep was the number one rep because he was basically the hoarder of information and didn't share anything, and they went out of their way to make sure that only their success was celebrated. And it's kind of like who's king of the monkey hill, trying to get to the top, but no one was helping each other. And during those years that I was there, I saw like 40 or 50 people getting hired and fired. It was just this continuous stream of new AEs, and it was just so toxic that earlier on I was kind of like, all right, even if it might generate results, it's just kind of like, this is not, if I ever have the opportunity to start building teams, and kind of like at that particular moment, I didn't have that blueprint yet around this is how I want it. I just had a very clear picture. This isn't what I don't want. So when you're going out and building out that team, it was also really important that yes, you want to have that rock stars, but even more important, I wanted to have those profiles that were intrinsically motivated to help the people around them as well, versus just helping versus just helping themselves. So that was just very critical in the interview process. Is, hey, how can we categorize this person? Is this a high performer? Is this a low performer? Is it a lone wolf? Is this someone who's very data-driven? Is it someone that needs a lot of extrinsic motivation? But just making sure we had this perfect mix of personality that as a team, you get to the highest results versus as individuals, you might have one or two rock stars, but as a culture and team in a whole, you're not basically getting those results, that you want to.
Right. Yeah, no, interesting. I also get now better why you were done with outbound for a while. You didn't want it anymore, based on the past experience. I mean, you had like a crystal clear culture with the values and how you saw outbound fitting into these. And you were kind of looking for the people that would fit into that picture. What can you say about like the speed of recruitment? I mean, that depends probably very much on the context and, you know, what's the target, what's the KPI, or what growth, I mean, or what speed you have to grow. But like, if you would like to build a outbound sales motion, like what are the first key roles that you were looking for, and in what sequence do you make that happen?
So most important thing you need to understand when you're building out that outbound team is to be honest with the people that you're interviewing. So when we started building out these teams, I mean, so I joined in January 2020. I think in February 2020 is when we basically got those first snippets of information around, hey, there's this virus going on, what's going to happen? And then a couple of months later, obviously, you're in complete lockdown, and the SaaS market and fintech in general was just skyrocketing. It just, I mean, it was nuts. But it also meant that the fight for talent, specifically where I was hiring, was so fierce. And yeah, Dylan, I kid you not, I literally had, but not only me, I'm sure any business at that time, I had AEs who just came fresh out of university asking for 100K base or higher just because they were available, right? I mean, and again, and companies were hiring those ridiculous, or were basically giving those base salaries. So if this was kind of the mindset of people who were just finishing at university, you can imagine what sometimes the AEs were asking, who had the relevant experience, and who were actually getting those requests met at different businesses. So it was a highly competitive market, and there was almost no limit on what AEs were asking for. And at the exact same time, here I am creating and interviewing a team of finding those high performers with the extra benefit or the extra condition that, hey, by the way, I am expecting you also to do outbound within this particular sales org. Now, the reason why I feel it's so important, to be honest, is that any company at that particular time also needed to do outbound, but not everybody was being honest and open about it. So we did lose people during the interview process, but yeah, most of them also came back or actually reached out again, because what they got sold during that interview process versus what they were expecting to do, didn't always match up. So to answer your question, it's just, again, so finding the right people, but also be honest early on to make sure that you have the right people to also understand what's going to be expected from them, so they're not going to be surprised when you ask them to actually do some outbounding.
No, right. I think that's good, actually. I want to go a little bit deeper on that particular aspect of building out that sales motion, specifically because you mentioned there was like a hyper competitive time. So you really had to stood out. You really had to stood out with maybe the offering, maybe the recruitment approach, with you also making the right selection in all of that, while it is actually still not easy to find any talent at all. So I'm sure that you went through maybe a couple of learnings for yourself, of things that you thought like, oh, wow, this is something I bring in my career package. It's a good experience. I will keep it for life. Can you think of something like that top of mind?
Yeah, so one of the biggest learnings specifically out of those initial hirings were, I can be sometimes quite sure of myself when I have a certain picture in my head around, and then even though I fail, it's kind of like, I don't really care, because this is how I envisioned it, and I either win and reap the rewards, or I crash and burn and go home with my tail between my legs. But at least at night I can sleep soundly thinking, hey, this is how you felt it should have worked, and then again, wherever the chips may fall, that's basically how we're doing it. So one of the things that was really important to me, again, we talked about that sales culture. So I didn't work at this particular company. So, I mean, if this is not the way it is anymore right now, my apologies. But I had this thing with Oracle. for example. For me, this was always the dark side of sales in terms of that business. And again, I'm freaking generalizing here, right? But the company is so big, it's like one of those too big to fail kind of businesses. So if you're doing sales to companies that are, let's say, that big, it's not necessarily that, well, the company doesn't depend on you on reaching your quota. Your department will, or your leader will, but the company of that size, they'll manage, right? Again, so those too big to fail companies, and usually they come with a very toxic sales culture as well. Again, I kind of got scars from that period, so. And what I've always known and seen, and let's say that Oracle culture is more around how they are competing within different teams and organizations within the company itself, and how they're basically actually trying to win business and earn the trust of their customers. So anyone who came for an interview back at the time, where I basically saw that either Oracle background, or let's say the very too big to fail companies background, they kind of always had my preferred candidates. Let's just say it like this. But very early on, there was this one candidate who had that background as well. I actually was not about or did not want to interview him, but they gave some great reviews within my network. And I used to really talk to this guy. Had a couple of conversations, earned my trust, and turned out to be one of the best hires we ever did. So that for me was like one of those moments around, hey, you can basically have that certain vision or a certain picture, but don't be afraid to try something else every now and then.
Hi guys, I quickly want to let you know that we are doubling down on this podcast, and by so doing we are looking for the better revenue stories out there. So if you like what you hear, please give it a like or a follow. It is a simple click on a button, but that click would mean the world to us. All right, let's go back. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a great learning in both sides. Also for the new recruits that want to get through the noise, want to get that job. Thanks for sharing it. You told us about how to finding the right talents was super crucial in order to build that motion. You also shared with us how did you approach that? But then what was the next important step that you had to put into the organization to really establish that sales motion?
Yeah. Training and coaching was critical. So I don't know, shocker, right? So obviously finding that right profile. But B, making sure that. So also, here's the thing with sales. I know reporting and data-driven approaches are very important, but they're specifically really important when you're basically calculating your monthly and quarterly numbers, and you're reporting them upwards to the board, and you're making your strategic initiatives and strategic plans for the next 12 to 24 months. Yes, it's a critical component that every VP needs to understand. And needs to be able to generate those accurate numbers. But at the end of the day, sales isn't all about the numbers, right? It's still human-to-human conversations, and it was critical specifically for outbounding is that we had AEs that were not only masters of the craft, but also masters of the product that we were selling, and also masters of understanding the people on the other side. So specifically when you're looking at billing at the time, the biggest competitor of Chargebee, besides the direct competitors who were basically selling in the same verticals and the same categories, were in-house billing systems. And that's actually still something that's a key critical competitor 4 or 5 years down the road. But again, 50 or 60% of all conversations were more around, hey, this particular company has created their own billing engine internally, so why would an external solution work better than what we built ourselves? Now, we don't have to go down the path of me basically mentioning all the different aspects on why it is better, but it was really critical that we had AEs and we had a team that specifically from an outbound perspective could sit down with sometimes the person who actually created that inbound engine, that billing engine, and basically trying to educate them around, hey, what you've created and what you've built is awesome. You're basically trying to say to someone, it's not going to get you to the next stage of growth where you want to be. These are very experienced profiles, right? So from an AE, being able to talk at the same level as someone who has 10, 20, 30 years more experience, who may or may not have created their own baby, that you're now trying to convince to terminate prematurely and then put their trust in something that they may or may not have heard before, that's a huge undertaking. And I'm sure this is quite similar to other people listening right now who are doing solution selling on how do you actually earn their trust in your product. Yeah, it was very critical in having those right profiles with the right sales craft, but at the exact same time making sure that you educated them at such a point that they became actually professionals and experts in the problems that they were solving.
Gotcha. So how did you approach that more specifically? Was it about having like a very crystal clear onboarding program with, different modules that they had to go through? Was it about coaching? Was it about just trial and error? Like, how did you really try to approach that in order to make it so effectively as possible?
Yeah, so the process that we had, so the first month, all education and training and onboarding. So the first 4 weeks, you were not allowed to pick up the phone or to do any selling. This was basically learn the product first, or at least understand what we're doing. After 30 days, they would do 3 or 4 mock calls internally within the company with different people within leadership. It was basically your graduation moment. And you need to have 3 or 4 yes moments in order to move forward to, let's say, your next stage of onboarding. So it was very critical that you didn't only learn the product, but you were actually tested in order to make sure that at that particular moment in time, you have actually reached the skill set that we required to someone to be. So let's say after 4 weeks, you officially graduated your onboarding school, and you are now allowed to, you now had the opportunity to start selling. But even back then, we did not let people sell into the segment that they were hired to sell into. So everyone started at the startup segment. So again, Chargebee at the time, we had 3 segments: startup, mid-market, and enterprise. Even if you were an enterprise AE, after that first month, you didn't start in the enterprise, you actually started in the startup segment. Why I decided to do this is, A, you were going to have way more face time and touch points with prospects in the startup segment, because again, this is where most of them were coming in. And you learn by doing, and in all fairness, and you know this as well, for any AE that basically starts at a business, you're not going to be the rock star from day one. Right? It doesn't matter how big of a talent you are. Anyone who starts somewhere, fast forward 12 months, and they'll basically look back and say, wow, those first 6 months, I did not know what I was doing. I mean, it takes 6 to 12 months, basically, to become an expert at your craft. So specifically in those early days, you want to get them as much face time with prospects as humanly possible. So again, at startup, you just had more of those touch points. And it was also a great place to fail and learn. I'm not saying that I wanted them to fail in startup, but I'd much rather have someone fail at a ACV of a couple of K versus failing the first or second time out at a $500,000 or $1 million contract, right? So starting up in the startup segment was really important. And then when you had your first sale, this is basically when you officially graduated, and then you went into the segment that you were actually hired into. And having a mid-management layer was also critical for me at the time. So having those player coaches, I always prefer to also promote internally, specifically on that management layer, so that they can actually ramp new AEs faster, because they already understand and know the product, right? So we put a lot of time and emphasis on onboarding earlier on, a lot of time and emphasis on letting people actually fail in selling the product. And then when you actually get that first close in, then you move on and start actually doing what we hired the person to do with the right manager on top of it, who can really be that player coach and ask all the relevant questions for you.
Was it super clear? Because I know that they had already some footprint. I mean, I know that Chargebee had already somewhat of a footprint in Europe. So was it also clear in terms of numbers, quota, targets, what you could expect from the reps, so that you could have like a very clear ramp up and then target that they should attain? Or was it actually something that you also kind of had to define on the go, because really establishing a team and a strong representation in that market was maybe somewhat new to that extent? So what would you say? Was it quite clear? Could you really set up very clear expectation to the sales team, or had you somewhat of doubts regarding that?
No, we were setting very clear expectations to the sales team, and we also had a very clear understanding on the addressable market and where we wanted Chargebee to be in, and how much and how long of time we wanted to get there, and then reverse engineer to an extent you need to do on a quarter-to-quarter basis. However, Dylan, again, I'm sure this will be very familiar with a lot of leaders in SaaS, and this is also why Chargebee needed to build out that outbound motion. Any business out there who's at that Series C or D stage or had a certain evaluation, as soon as you have a couple of large investors in the business, it doesn't matter anymore how fast you're growing organically. It really doesn't. It's kind of like even if you're working at the company with the highest possible product fit humanly possible, as soon as you're at that Series C or Series B, the board will just look at your numbers and say, hey, Dylan, that's freaking amazing. Now 2x that. And then it's kind of like, oh, and by the way, can you do this next quarter? And then the conversation comes more around basically what's feasible versus the manpower that you have versus what can the company actually onboard at a certain particular moment in time before actually just, not having enough resources to actually servicing your customers and businesses. So it's always that continuous challenge and struggle with what's possible in terms of the amount of resources that you have to grow versus what's the addressable market at a particular moment in time versus what's the board expectation and how much time are you actually getting to grow to a certain point. So it's a combination of all these factors that will give quite some interesting results in terms of targets and attainments.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You can never grow fast enough, that's for sure. All right, guys. Imagine being able to leverage the data from LinkedIn, Google, any website, and then leveraging prompt engineering and generative AI to craft the perfect message. That's now possible thanks to Clay. Clay truly revolutionizes the outbound game, and so you can try it out for free by surfing to wearesales.com/clay. That's wearesales.com/CLAY. All right, let's go back to the episode. What can you say about the cooperation with the other revenue departments? Because initially it was inbound driven, so for sure you had like a strong marketing presence, I suppose, there were clients, so you also had that customer success in place. But all of a sudden you add like a new department, a new team, a new point of contact towards customer, that sales team that's doing the outbound. So how do you make sure that all of a sudden, that team works very efficiently and effectively with the other teams in the company?
Critical. Can't emphasize this enough, how sales is a team sport, and that everyone, not only customer-facing people, but everyone in a revenue organization or in the organization in general, needs to be able to maybe not necessarily step up, but allocate a certain piece of their time in order to assist the revenue organization. So, every department is critical, but again, going back to that outbound motion, and when you're working your way up market, when you're at that stage, when you're ready to start outbounding to those mid-market and enterprise businesses, again, what we talked about earlier on is earning that trust of the person that's sitting in front of you. With all due respect, the AE is not necessarily going to earn that trust. There's some, but they are, let's say, masters of the craft. They understand the product. They have a degree in sales, a degree in finance, a degree in engineering. They're basically that one-hit wonder who can do it all. If you have a couple of those, awesome. It's not necessarily scalable or repeatable. So you need to be able to support that AE on those calls to fill the gaps that they don't necessarily have or need to have in order to earn that trust. So obviously having a very sophisticated sales engineering team is critical, but also having people in products who can speak on some of the features that are being built, that are on the roadmap, but also who can elaborate a little bit more on some of those feature capabilities that have been built. And then again, depending on the profile that's in front of you, making sure that you have the right experts within your own organization to help you out in that sales process. So again, if you're speaking to someone in marketing, making sure that you bring someone from marketing on those calls as well. In our case, we were speaking more often to people, let's say, from a finance background, so the CFO or sometimes the CEO. So then it was really important that we also match that seniority level. So everyone in the business understood, even if you were one of the founders at Chargebee or CMO or CFO. When sales basically asked you to join you on a call, basically you didn't say no. So we made sure there was a lot of executive to executive alignment calls earlier on in the sales cycle, just to make sure that the business or the prospect is heard, and then the AE will take it from there, and they'll basically be sure to gather all the right internal resources at the right moment in time. So again, definitely a team effort.
Definitely a team effort, and the AE really needs to orchestrate that cooperation, that's for sure. What are like the key metrics that you definitely like to look at, especially when we're talking about like the outbound sales motion? Like what are, key things that you are weekly, monthly, quarterly following up on?
One of the critical measurements that we have is reverse engineering the outbound pipeline to make sure that it matches the style of that particular AE, because in my mind there was no one universal one-size-fits-all approach. So what does that mean? You start with the end goal, right? And again, I'm not explaining rocket science here, but what's my target? Let's just make the math easy. Let's say it's 1 million. All right, fine. What's the average order value? And again, depending on which market segment you're selling into, that's basically your baseline. So let's say, again, you need anywhere between 10 to 30 deals. But this, again, I'm not saying these are the Chargebee numbers, I'm just basically spitballing here. So if you need 10 to 30 opportunities, specifically from an outbound perspective, then you're going to be looking at, all right, so how many opportunities do I actually need to work on in order to get to those 10 and 30? So this is basically more your win rate. And again, a win rate, and then if you ever find me someone, maybe a person that you've already talked to in the podcast who can explain to me how to calculate win rate properly, please put me in contact with them, because this, after 5 years, I've still not been able to frequently to solve this conundrum. But again, that's a different conversation that we can zoom in later. But
why do you say that? May I ask?
I can ask 10 VPs how they calculate win rates, and I get 10 different answers depending on either how they want it to be calculated, or depending how the board is calculating it, or it's not properly segmented in their particular area. So again, this is one of those metrics where if you look it up, even online or basically even in the textbooks, you're going to get 10 different definitions, and it's always about pick the definition that basically matches or the specific work. But again, this is a number that you can make that number be any number that you want by just changing the formula. So again, finding that sweet spot, okay, what's the win rate that actually works for me? So again, man, I can sometimes speak to two VPs or CROs and are saying, well, our win rate is 70 to 75%. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm sure I can look at your win rate and then put a different formula to it, and then actually your win rate is 10%, right? Because it may be 70 to 75 because you're only focusing on the ones that are actually going to be closing anyway, right? So it's kind of like, when do you start adding opportunities, and when do you start classifying them as a sales qualified, and when can you actually honestly say to yourself, hey, we actually lost this one while we shouldn't, versus, the timing wasn't right. But again, this is more of a personal thing of mine, and again, we can go down this rabbit hole, and then we have the next 2-3 hours about this conversation. But again, just going back to your first point, right? So what do we measure the AEs on? So again, win rate, but also specified a little bit more around how that particular individual contributor's win rate should be. And then, if you have all of that in front of you, then you can start calculating, all right, so then I need to have this many touch points or this many leads on a daily or weekly basis in order to reach the number that I want at the end of the day. So continuously we checked during QBR specifically. This was always like the major moment where we started to look down, right, so what were your activities? Is this in line with the formula that we created on this particular individual in order to be successful in the end? Because one of the things you want to be very mindful of, both on inbound but also specifically in outbound, is AEs with tunnel vision, right? They'll look at their pipe, they're seeing these couple of deals, the product fit is there, the opportunity is there, the numbers are there, and they'll zoom into those opportunities, and then they forget doing the day-to-day, weekly, or the monthly exercise in order to continuously keep growing your pipeline. And again, what happens when you have that tunnel vision, you focus too much on those couple of opportunities in your pipe, and only one or two have to slip, and then you end up in a situation where you miss your numbers. So it was a continuous measurement around, hey, what are your weekly and monthly activities? How did it look like? And is that in line with the formula that we had created for this particular AE?
Yeah, and then that's where you come in and you say, hey, maybe you need to fill that pipeline again. About those moments, like how was your agenda orchestrated? Like when did you have like those performance meetings with the team? You mentioned QBR, which is like an obvious one, but like what was the cadence that you had put in place to have those, continuous follow-up on the team?
Yeah, so we were pretty hands-on with in terms of coaching. So and I say coaching, and I'm intentionally, because one of the things we definitely did not want to do is backseat driving and telling people how to do it. But so yeah, every morning or every Monday morning, just making sure that you have this weekly team stand-up where myself am also present to go over the individual pipeline. And this is not where we went into detail. This was purely one of those moments, hey, what's the next step? Where do you need assistance? Where do you need help? Like 1 or 2 minute update per opportunity. Then the manager sat down with their teams, doing other one-on-one continuously during a week. And then by the end of the week, basically, I would have my most updated numbers from my managers and directors to do the reporting and whatnot. So pretty hands-on in terms of making sure that they got the right coaching and then I'll FaceTime to actually hear what some of those roadblocks are in order to take them away and then let them progress with those deals. While at the same time, we also put a lot of emphasis in education and coaching. So there were a lot of weekly sessions just with the AEs themselves, with the manager to, again, learn from each other and share losses and share success stories where if you have a great win, share it with your peers so they understand what you actually did that make it so successful. And also when you fell flat on your face and you had a big loss, to make sure that you basically sit down with your team so they can actually pick yourself up.
Also share that. Yeah.
But also making sure, hey, I did this particular thing, didn't work. So again, just making sure that you learn from your wins and losses as a team, not just as an individual.
Yeah, is that what you meant by when you said that we are also putting a lot of effort into the coaching, to the education? Or when you say we are doing that, is it really about competence building, understanding what are the skill set that people in the team are lacking so that we can try to work and coach on that? Was it more about sharing with the team, or was it really about the individual skill sets that need to be tweaked?
Both. So the individualism basically came more between, let's say, a sales manager and the AE, identifying different areas of improvement. So all the calls are recorded, so everyone can basically go into that call and basically go back and see, hey, this could have been changed or that's going to be better. But that's not necessarily where I basically spend most of my time. I spent most of my time when it came to education and coaching and having those weekly sessions together with the entire team. And everyone needed to prepare 1 or 2 opportunities and then go through them and then hear what they did right, what they did wrong, and making sure that everyone participated and learned from each other and coached from each other. And it also really became a moment for people where they were looking forward. Well, we don't always look forward to those sessions, but here's the thing though. If you just had a huge win, I mean, you want to be standing on top of this stage, right? And basically shout to everyone what you've done that made it such a huge win. And also when you had a big loss, you want to be able just to sit together with everyone and discuss, hey, how would you have done it? Is there anything different that you could have done? So just making sure that as a team together, you grow and learn.
I think that's a good spirit. I think that's a good, again, enforcing that collaboration somehow. I can also imagine when you have to establish like a sales outbound motion, you also have to think about the different sales plays that can come at hand, right? If this happens, then we got to do this. Then also think of, sales enablement that joins the team to kind of develop those plays in cooperation with different revenue teams. Like, I don't know, what is your experience when it comes to that?
Man, we've done them all. We've had force management.
Do we need an extra hour, Tarmo?
Probably. No, we had force management. We had winning by design. We've had them all. We had all the playbook. They are important. They are critical. But at the end of the day, if you have the right managers and the right leaders, that's most important. I mean, yes, having that sales playbook is important. It's particularly important in order to ramp AEs faster, right? So again, going back to the uniqueness of Chargebee and being able to have meet certain growth expectations in the smallest time possible. So again, the sales team grew to 30 or 40 people like within a blink of an eye, and making sure that all those reps are ramped in less time than what you would normally like. This is where those sales playbooks make a difference and help out to give someone basically that starting point. But after 2 or 3 or 4 months, now it basically comes down to making sure that you're educated. But again, this is, I mean, I literally had during the creations of those playbooks, and again, I'm not gonna name any names, but this was their version of outbounding, right? My God, you're paying these people hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So you're going in there with certain expectations, right? I'm paying you a lot of freaking money here, so I'm expecting a lot as well. And then when I hear in one of those sessions, all right, so this is what you need to do during outbounding. You go on LinkedIn or whatever, and when you see one of your prospects start asking questions around billing and subscription billing and whatnot, like this is the moment you need to reach out. I'm sitting there, no shit, Sherlock. you're telling me that when someone goes online asking for a billing solution, that's the perfect moment in time to start prospecting to them? Like, yeah, well, 300K well spent.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Again, and they're great at what they do, but there's a lot of open doors that they come up with as well.
Yeah, I think it's just like you say, when you have to ramp up people, giving them like guidelines of this is a good way to do it, not the best way, not the perfect way, because the perfect way is never going to be there, and the best way is different for everyone. Mm-hmm. So just having that guideline maybe at the beginning, but then you give the flexibility to the team to, do whatever works for them, and that's when you say, I mean, to repeat yourself, it's about having the right leaders and the right team players in the organization.
I mean, I can give you one more example on how important the right people specifically also from an outbound perspective are. So France was always a critical market for us, just because we had a lot of logos earlier on. So that's always a great way to start expanding your footprint in a different region, right? Just point to a couple of logos that you already have, which are very recognizable, and build on those to move forward. So I always knew, man, there's such a huge opportunity in France. We never really got momentum in that market until I found the right 1 or 2 AEs. So did I change the approach? Did we tweak certain numbers? Did we as a management just came up with this eureka moment around, hey, we need to do it like this? No, not necessarily. It was just not having the right people in those markets until you have that 1 or 2 people, and then they click, it just matches, and then all of a sudden you see those results that you always knew that were there, but just not having that right person was just preventing you from reaching those particular numbers. So again, it's very easy then for a leader to basically step up to the board and say, well, look at what we've done in France. But again, yes, that's important, but at the end of the day, you can put all the numbers and data-driven decisions you want. At the end of the day, it's just making sure that you have that right profile.
Yeah, I like that, because it really simplifies also the way that you look at business, at sales in general, and instead of overcomplicating everything.
Yep.
I mean, yes, it is additive to a certain extent, and sometimes you need to crunch into the data, but I mean, the essence is the basics.
And again, I don't want to just brush off that data is not important, because again, you need to have that data-driven decision to also understand that, hey, this is a critical market. And then if you're not able to penetrate that market within the time that you thought it was possible, if the data is showing you this is possible but it's not working, then obviously you need to change your approach or find a real profile. So data is definitely important in terms of making sure that your focus is in the right areas, and that you also stick your focus in those areas because the data is actually telling you that this should work, and then you just keep working at it until you have that tipping moment.
That momentum. Yeah, definitely. Tarmo, unfortunately, we are reaching the end of the podcast. So First of all, thank you so much for doing this, for making the time, for sharing your experience. I think it's always good to have like a fresh new perspective into how things are being done by leaders that have been there, done that. So first of all, thanks for that. Other than that, is there a way that you want to use this platform for? Maybe there is like a certain call to action that you want to share. Maybe you're looking for like a new project because you told me you just recently left Chargebee. Maybe you want to do a call to action for Chargebee itself. I mean, anything you want to use this platform for?
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, here's the thing, though. Specifically, when I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest competitors at Chargebee, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, was in-house billing. The market is at that stage where I can definitely say, and most businesses have woken up and realized this as well, that you don't build your own CRM solution, you don't build your own ERP solution, you should definitely also not want to build out your own billing solution. So for every company who's at that stage, who now basically has that realization as well around, hey, why are we spending 20 or 30 FTEs on a yearly basis trying to create and maintain that engine that we have? Again, the solution is out there. Again, it's called Chargebee. Give them a call. Again, you're going to have very highly educated people having those conversations with you and identifying where the value add is going to be. For me, from a personal note, I mean, again, I'm just looking at that next adventure within my own personal career. So for me, if there's businesses out there who are either looking to have that outbound motion, or if there's, let's say, businesses who are looking to expand their footprint in Europe, always more than happy to have those conversations.
It sounds like you found peace with the outbound motion again. I was just saying that it seems like you found peace with the sales outbound motion again, as you said that you would be open to for such a position.
It's amazing how success can change the perspective, right? So yeah, exactly.
I get that. Well, Tarmo, it was a pleasure to have you on. I wish you nothing but the best and see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
That's it. We've once again reached the end of an episode. I just really appreciate you all spending the time. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And until next week with a fresh new episode.